be running our meeting this evening. Please be reminded, as you just heard, the meeting is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, turn off your video and your mic. Thank you for joining us tonight, the June 23rd Sierra Loxahatchee Group's general meeting, and we have a very special treat for you tonight. I'm Mary Mertz, your host for tonight's meeting. I'm very excited to introduce and interview our guest, Mario Alejandro Ariza, an investigative reporter, author, and speaker. Before I give a little more information on Mario, we have just a few announcements and housekeeping notes. Let's see here, as you know. Okay, just as a reminder, our website URL is listed right here. And we hope that you'll take the time to visit our website, find out what we're doing, what we're up to, which is a lot these days, and tune in to some of the committee meetings that we're holding so that you can get involved and help us with our projects and meeting our mission. Whoops, here's an example of our calendar. And again, if you go to our website, you can find the calendar, which lists all the activities coming up. We hope you'll visit it soon. And upcoming meetings include Communications Committee, Conservation Committee, the Equity, Inclusion, Justice Committee meeting date will be determined soon. The Political Meeting Committee will meet again Thursday, July 21st. And again, visit the website and see what we have going on so you can participate. We need volunteers. This is something that we can't function without you. So we hope more people will get involved, help us with our meeting our mission, help us interview some of the candidates that we have. It's going to be a very important election this year. We want to tune in, we want to be aware and informed on the issues that matter to us. We do need a membership committee chair, so think about it and give us a call and let us know if we can put your name in here. The Conservation Committee is headed by Drew Martin. This is one of our most active committees. And we're asking people to come and join us at some of the governmental meetings that are coming up. The Palm Beach County Board of Commissioners will be meeting Tuesday, July 12th. It's to address matters by the public. You can speak on any topic for 3 minutes. We hope you'll take that time to make your thoughts and views known to our commissioners about the need to protect our important environmental lands. The council meeting will also talk about the agricultural reserve swap, which we're adamantly opposed to. That meeting will happen on Wednesday, the 31st. So pack a lunch and dinner, and it's going to be a long day. We hope some of you can come out and join. Martin County Commissioners met June the 21st to decide changes to Martin County Comprehensive Plan. This is a very important topic. They're expected to change the plan so that developers can build on environmentally sensitive lands, and we're very much opposed to this. Try to read up on the issue and send your thoughts in to the Martin County commissioners. And we're still in the planning stages, but Martin County again is under attack because there's a proposed wet sand and rock mine being proposed. And again, we want to, I'm sorry, not Martin County, St. Lucie County. And this is going to be something very important to the people that live in that area. And one initiative that we're supporting is the right to clean water. We are trying to get this on the ballot, and a petition is underway, a petitioning process. So please go to the website or contact Tiffany at the email listed on the slide. And if you want to volunteer, or if you're interested in volunteering or working to secure some signatures, let them know. I'm sure they'll be happy to have you. And for next time, our next general meeting will be Thursday, July 28th, starting at 7:30 p.m. And it's going to be with Michael McGrath, who's going to talk about Florida's water quality crisis, harmful algae blooms, and slime crimes. That sounds interesting. I love the title. And now we get to talk about our main presentation, which is from Mario Alejandro Ariza, an author and investigative reporter. He authored the book, The Disposable City, Miami's Future on the Shores of Climate Catastrophe. Mario grew up in Santo Domingo in Miami, where he currently lives. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, the Miami New Times, the New Tropic, the Sun Sentinel. He was featured on Sinking Cities, a recent PBS documentary series, which identifies the threat of climate change and rising seas in Miami and other coastal cities around the world. In his book, Mario helps us understand the abstract scientific component of climate change while weaving a much more insightful study of the negative effects on the personal and social fabric of our local communities. He addresses issues such as the breakdown of cultural neighborhoods through climate gentrification, health impacts of rising temperatures, and an increase of flooding events, particularly on the vulnerable and lower income residents. He talks about climate migration and what the impacts might be when residents are forced to abandon sinking cities. Mario's research provides the contextual framework of how deep-rooted systemic injustice and failed governmental action have exacerbated the negative impacts of climate change on our communities. Racial bias, foreign investment in real estate, discriminatory real estate, banking and insurance practices, public construction projects, building codes, zoning changes, and even Florida's tax base all play a part in the negative effects of climate change. As we begin this interview, I have to tell you, Mario, I really enjoyed your book. I'm going to stop sharing this, and there's a cover of Mario's book that you can see right here. And I will tell you, it's a great read. It's available in bookstores or online. I really did learn so much that I didn't know, and I thought I knew. So go figure. Right now, I'm going to stop the share, and we are going to mute all. And we're going to highlight Mario. Okay, and Mario, I need to.
I'm unmuted, sure.
There we go. Okay, so I hope everybody can see us okay. And I'm going to get Mario started here. One thing that I wanted to say was I was amazed at how well documented all the points that you were making in your book were. You footnoted everything. Your interviews and your personal experiences were plentiful. They were varied. They were insightful and just really very entertaining. You had many adventures while you were doing the research for this book. That's for sure. And I wanted to start out with what actually prompted you to write this book, to start this project?
Sure, great question. So I actually got fired from a job, and that led to the snowball effect of me writing a book about Miami and climate change. I used to teach Spanish and history at a very high-end prep school in Boston, or just outside of Boston. I was very unhappy doing that work. And the school didn't renew my contract after a couple of years. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do with my life? Okay, let me go back to school and get a master's degree in poetry. Sure, that sounds like a really fungible profession that's going to leave me a lot of money. Why not do that? And in order to try and make as much cash as I could before starting poetry school, because they were going to pay me, but not a lot, I went to China to teach English in the summer of 2015. And I loved China. It was beautiful. It was awe-inspiring. Like the infrastructure was great. I was in the city of 8 million people called Zhengzhou that nobody's ever heard of. And it was the middle of summer, actually close to my birthday, close to this time of year. And I stepped outside and I could not see the other side of the street because of how bad the smog was. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And this is, remember, back in 2015, we all didn't know what N95 masks were. And somebody was like, hey, yeah, the air quality is really bad. You should wear one of these masks. And they handed me a pack of N95s, which I still had a few left when the pandemic started. But yeah, so that was the moment where this abstract concept that the climate is changing and that it's not really good for everybody involved became embodied in me, right? It was something I could feel, it was something I could see, it was something I could unfortunately breathe. It felt like I was breathing a pack of Marlboro cigarettes all lit at the same time in my mouth. And that led me to start researching, because I'm a bit of an obsessive researcher, into what this was going to do to the city that I was moving back to after 10 years away. I was moving back to Miami. And none of it was good. none of my research was particularly soothing, shall I say. I very quickly realized that it was going to be a huge problem. I started writing about it, and one thing led to another, and I published a few articles. And at a party at a literary conference years ago, some editor who I had talked to about septic tanks for about 45 minutes too long wanted to really get away from me. And he's like, you should write me a book proposal. And I'm like, what's a book proposal? So because I couldn't shut up about septic tanks, I learned what a book proposal was. And that's how this book began.
That's amazing. It's just one little thing that can trigger a whole litany of things that follow. And I think, it takes that graphic representation and that personal experience to bring it home for a lot of people. They don't think about the climate change issues until they walk out in their front yard on a sunny day and they're ankle deep in water. So those kinds of things really hit us particularly hard. But how did you get the name of your book, particularly The Disposable City?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was doing reporting for an outlet here in Miami, and I was, I forget what the story was about. I really do. But I was having a conversation with a very powerful attorney that represented a trade group for developers here in Miami and for constructors. And after we talked for a bunch of time, it was about affordable housing. They were killing an affordable housing initiative dead at the county commission level. It was, one of these typical things. And I sort of asked him, hey, so what do you think about this climate change stuff? And he's like, listen, man, I just hope, first of all, you need to have a really good bedside manner with the patient. It was the first thing he told me. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, I just hope we get 4 or 5 more good business cycles out of the city before we have to leave. And to hear that cynicism, self-interest, acknowledgement, but one could argue just rent-seeking behavior coming from somebody who has this much power, right? Was shocking. It made me feel like, okay, this place that I love, that I absolutely adore, right, South Florida, was getting treated disposably, was getting treated like some place that they were going to extract capital from and then move on.
So he already was very aware of what was going on, but it was a matter of just get what you can get while you can and then take off.
That's
So
right.
it's really sad.
That's right.
Well, we read the title and we're starting to get the idea of what's happening. But then in the very first chapter, you support that idea through some very powerful imagery. You recount a city tour that the former mayor led for the head of the UN Global Commission on Adaptation, when you stopped to see what you described as the nicest, shiniest, most capable pump that I'd ever seen. And it was prominently displayed in one of the most expensive City of Miami districts. Can you tell us a little about that?
Sure, yeah. Listen, it was a really nice pump. Still one of the nicest pumps I've seen. And we're gonna learn a lot more about pumps before this whole climate change thing is over. Trust me, especially here in South Florida. But so yeah, Miami has positioned itself, or has tried to position itself as sort of a city that is adapting to climate change, right? They're putting in infrastructure to help them deal with some of the negative effects of the changing climate. So one of those is pumps. They're redoing their whole stormwater system so that when it rains, if the tide is high, they can still ideally drain the street. And one of the things that has happened in Miami is that downtown and Brickell have really developed. This property developer named Swire has come in. They built Brickell City Center. They're Singapore based, I believe, though fact check me on those two bits of the name and where they're from. And the city, is part of the construction initiative, I think there was, I believe, like some money paid by the developer. They put in a really nice pump to get all of the water moving. And it's great. It's great. It really is. But you have to think about it in terms of taxes and return on investment now, right? So do you live in a place where the government is willing to spend to defend it? Do you live in a place where your tax value is high enough where there's an ROI for adaptation? Or do you live on one of those streets in the Florida Keys that the Monroe County government's already telling the homeowners, like, hey, buddy, listen, we love you. You're great. But you're not getting any electricity, trash, or water or sewer after 10 years because the sea level is going to be too high, and we're not going to put any money into fixing your street.
Well, I think, the thing that struck me is typically those kinds of infrastructure items are buried somewhere, they're hidden, but to have it prominently displayed and touted as one of the city's jewels or pride and joy struck me as being, a new thing that we would next find ourselves going to Lowe's or Home Depot, picking up the latest model and having it be the jewel of the neighborhood, comparing it, keeping up with the Joneses, who has the best pump. But it also, that was supported by another graphic that really struck me, and that was the title of your second chapter. There's an octopus in the parking garage.
Right.
And in fact, there was, and it just makes me think, is the octopus canary in a coal mine, if you will, for South Florida?
Yeah. Sort of, yeah. I mean, listen, like if you go on Miami Beach or parts of Fort Lauderdale, and even parts of the barrier island of Palm Beach during king tides, there are certain underground parking garages there, right? And these underground parking garages can flood. And in Miami Beach, there's one where an octopus showed up a while back, and a couple of weeks ago there was a school of fish during a particular high tide, and it's a really iconic image. But it's an iconic image not just because of this octopod, this mollusk, is in a place where it probably shouldn't be and is quite confused, and I feel a little bit sorry for it. But it's also a symbolic image, right? Because South Florida, Palm Beach, all the way down, right? Our city, our region was constructed by money that's oil wealth, right? It comes from the wealth of an oil baron who built Standard Oil, right? Who was the number 2 for Rockefeller. And if there's anything that symbolizes Standard Oil, it's this cartoon by a guy named Otto Berger of the Standard Oil Octopus Trust, right? Because you got to remember, Standard Oil was one of the biggest companies ever. It's the first time that anybody had seen a conglomerate, and it was an octopus putting its tentacles everywhere. And so when I saw that octopus in the parking garage, it's not just, you know, the canary in the coal mine, but literally it's a canary in a coal mine in a city made by mining, or in this case, you know, selling oil, which has contributed to the crisis, which has caused the crisis, arguably. So it's really an image that kind of bears dwelling upon, right? Because we are sort of burning ourselves into octopus habitat or future octopus habitat.
I think that's part of it because, you know, we are trying, I think we're all recognizing that climate change exists. There are arguments about who's causing it, but I think you have to, if you accept the fact that there is climate change, you accept the fact that there are reasons for climate change and causes, and one of those is burning of fossil fuel. But while we're recognizing it more and more, we're spending more money mitigating it or adapting to it, rather than dealing with the issue of reducing the need for fossil fuels. Correct. But even so, let's say it's a legitimate attempt to address the issue. There are so many variables. And one of the things you talked about that I found very insightful are the different assessors and assessments of the predictions of sea level rise that's caused by climate change. So you would think there would be a standard that everyone uses, but I was very surprised to find that there isn't. And you cited some agencies and scientists that recognize that underplay the threat. And a lot of it is depending on what agencies they're working for. You cite specifically in Miami Airport, FP&L at Turkey plants, and some of the others. Can you tell us how you stumbled across that and how that all works? And
sure, yeah. So first of all, let's just get the science out, right? Let's just let it all out. I was born in 1987. The parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere was 347.6. Today it is 420 parts per million. As that number increases, the shininess of the Earth decreases, right? Less light escapes, more heat stays in. Things get hotter. Carbon dioxide is a shiny gas, right? Our burning of fossil fuels is putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That is causing climate change. That is the primary driver of climate change. Now, we have put so much carbon into the atmosphere that we have never witnessed anything like this before, right? We've done it so quickly that you can't really effectively predict how the West Antarctic ice sheet is going to behave, because it's a big block of ice, hundreds of kilometers long and miles deep. And if you're gonna guess how that thing is gonna break up or how, you know, it's a lot of math, and we haven't seen that before, right? Like nobody in the historical record was like, oh yeah, I remember when the East Antarctic ice sheet collapsed, that was really terrible. No. So there are differing predictions about how much water is going to show up and when it's going to show up, and that stands to reason, right? Like different scientists will tell you different amounts, and really the honest wisdom is that you just gotta kind of pick your poison. What's your probability curve? What's your risk tolerance? You know this is going to happen. What kind of infrastructure do you have? What kind of things do you have on the line? How long are you going to be there? What's the geography? What's the hydrology? Figure it out. And there are really, really smart people spending lots of money to do this for every single asset around, period, right? Like your house is being graded on this now. And there will be a future when you may or may not be able to sell your home because somebody will or will not loan to you depending on sea level rise predictions. Apologies. But with that said, right, we were at the science and what's going to happen and what's figuring this out, right? But sincerely, the issue becomes that, sorry, Mary, would you repeat your question? The phone call kind of set me off a little bit.
No, I was asking about how there are different assessors and assessments based on the agency that's reviewing them so that they can set their protocols to be able to address the increase in sea level rise.
Right, and so there was no uniform amount that you were supposed to build to, up until a couple of years ago when a former state senator named Jose Javier Rodriguez passed a law that says, listen, if you're building coastal infrastructure, you have to take sea level rise into account, right? I know infrastructure builders in Southeast Florida are building to the compact, which is 2 feet by 2070 or something like that. But if you look at large chunks of infrastructure that some people may or may not want to upgrade, like Turkey Point, the prediction for Turkey Point was that there was only going to be a foot of sea level rise because they didn't want to put any money into the plant because they don't make money off of nuclear plants anymore, right? They make money off of gas plants. And so I actually did an investigation into the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's preparation of nuclear power plants for sea level rise. And lo and behold, the federal regulator was not requiring nuclear plants to plan for this, right? So FPL was going to get a 40-year license, I believe, fact check me on that, on the plant saying, oh yeah, there's not going to be that much sea level rise in 40 years. That wasn't necessarily accurate. And I think in part because of our reporting, that changed. Now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is actually making them be like, hey, you might want to check that map. Did you carry the 2 there? So that's what's going on with that. And you kind of have to participate in government to make sure that your local infrastructure is being built to a place where it will survive. But you have to think about all the infrastructure around it has to get redone.
And do you think that that has an impact on, this very timely crisis that we're experiencing with housing insurance? The recognition of the impacts of more frequent storms and all, is that really hitting us hard now?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are several reasons for the home property insurance crisis in Florida right now. It's what we'll call charitably an absolute mess, right? It's a complex crisis with many drivers, shall we say. But one of the drivers is the fact that if you're an insurance company, you sell your insurance, and then you go out and you buy insurance for the insurance that you sell. It's called reinsurance. And there's only a couple of people in the world who sell that reinsurance. There's Lloyd's of London, there's Swiss Re, there's a big banks, Barclays, that kind of stuff. And so those reinsurers reinsure everybody around the world. And as things around the world start to get a little bit more gnarly, right? Heat waves in Southeast Asia destroy the crop. A monsoon in Indonesia completely shatters an industry. Hurricanes in the Gulf hit again and again and again. They have to pay more and more, and the cost for reinsurance goes up. And that affects your property insurance in Florida, even though it is not directly affected by a natural disaster, because we're all linked through this global financial system. So that's one driver of it, for sure.
And, it makes you wonder, that it's not just insuring the coastal areas, and that I think historically those insurance rates were very low and minimized, and now they're trying to catch up to it. But it also impacts all the homes that are in agricultural areas or the central part of the state that are going to be just as impacted. Can you give us, in your book, I believe it's chapter 5, you talk about Lake Okeechobee and some of the impacts that they're experiencing.
So sea level rise is not just a coastal problem, and climate change is not just a problem if you live in Florida on the coast, right? It's a problem for everybody. If you live inland, and this depends upon your geology and your height above sea level, and what kind of soil you have below you. Here in Southeast Florida, in Miami-Dade and in Broward, we have a lot of what's called oolitic limestone. I know portions of Palm Beach are on that limestone formation as well. Basically, it's like rocky sponge, right? A bunch of holes in it. The water gets all the way through. The water during the summer, right, because of hydrostatic pressure, actually rises, right? You get a lot of rain. It sits there, and the water table will go up and down depending on the season. It will also go up and down depending on the height of the sea level. So there's not really like a dike or a dam that you can build to get your way out of this. But as the general hydrostatic pressure increases, right, as there's just more water around, and folks, there's more water, right? I came to the United States in 1993. There's been 6 inches of sea level rise in Miami's Virginia Key gauge, tidal gauge since then, right? So that's half a foot. The amount that the water rises inland goes up as well. So say you're an inland home in a rural area and you're on oolitic limestone and you're on the aquifer, and you don't have good drainage and it starts raining a lot more frequently, or maybe less frequently, but when it rains a ton, right? And your water doesn't drain, all of a sudden your septic tank isn't necessarily working. And there are large chunks of South Miami, right? And I think this is also a problem for rural Broward, especially on the western edges of Broward, where the rapid development that was done with septic tanks is coming around to kind of bite people in the butt, frankly, because now these things are more expensive and you're going to have to replace them with sewer, and septic to sewer conversion is a very expensive process. Miami-Dade is tasking it on, but it's not just an issue for your pocket, it's an issue for the environment, right? Biscayne Bay is dying in large part because of the phosphorus and the nitrogen, the poop from the septic tanks that leaches in all the way to the bay from the canals. Now, don't get me started talking on septic tanks, I'll just go on. But yeah, so it's a big issue for the homes that are inland as well as the homes that are on the coast.
And I wonder, too, we talk about when we think about coastal and we think about inland and we think about agricultural land that's impacted by not only sea level rise, but increased droughts or increased intense weather situations. And then we look at waterborne pathogens. So you're seeing impacts that could extend to, and you talked a little about climate migration and climate gentrification. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you found in your research there?
Yeah, sure. And also, if I could go back for a second to the South Florida Water Management District, one impact that you'll definitely see in Palm Beach, it's where the Water Management District is headquartered. You may, if you're close to the St. Lucie, you may have a problem with algae, right? And that's obviously something driven by agriculture, but it's exacerbated by higher temperatures and strange rainfall patterns. Because what we've taken is we took a natural system, the Everglades, right, that had its own rules, and we put man-made rules on it. It's a political system now. And a political system carries balances and trade-offs. It's a market, it's not an economy. Or sorry, it's not an ecosystem, it's distinct. So that's an issue, but getting to the issues of climate migration and to moving, right, and displacement. So this is a tough issue to talk about because it's emotional, right? Like I have a scene in the book where in the first chapter, it's my grandma's 80th birthday party, and I can't have fun in the birthday party because we're at my mom's condo. We're kind of overlooking the city of Miami, and I'm wondering to myself, am I going to get my 80th birthday party in Miami? Right? Am I literally going to be able, are the lights going to be working? Is there going to be a foot of water, 2 feet of water sloshing around in the street? Like, what's the city going to look like? And I don't know. It's an open question. So there's a demographer at the University of Florida. I don't know if he's still at the University of Florida. He may have left. His name is Matthew Hauer. He has basically done a great deal of modeling, mathematical predictions of what's going to happen, right? If the sea rises X amount and the temperatures increase Y amount and the rains change and yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of people moving to Orlando, one, right? People move to the closest place of land they can find. Young people will go to where the jobs are. Poorer folks will maybe get stuck, but also South Florida demographically starts to look very old, right? Not a lot of young people start moving down here, and the people who get stuck are increasingly folks who age into here and are unable to leave and are trapped. And this is what Howard says. And so this place becomes sort of like a, I don't know, I don't know how to describe it in kind terms, but it's a scary thought. It really is. So that's some of the climate migration. Yeah.
And you talked about some of the governmental practices and protocols, and we're experiencing that now. And I think also it's a good time to talk about recent legislative activity that just seems to foment that irresponsible development that we're all trying to fight. But you talked about some of the neighborhoods in Miami and how they were created and perhaps are being dissolved or destroyed by governmental action, failure to consider, the zoning restrictions and redlining practices, for example. So tell us a little about what you learned through that experience of researching those topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to, first of all, protecting wildlands, right? This is something that's very close to the Sierra Club mission. One of the reasons why it's so important in terms of stopping climate change, right? If you stop an area from being developed, you're stopping a lot of carbon from getting into the atmosphere. This is just sort of kind of basic, right? If it's scrubland, it's wildland, what is it doing? It's likely sequestering carbon. If you put a housing development in there, you're going to burn a lot of fuel to construct it. You're going to burn a lot of fuel for the materials. People with their large cars are going to burn a lot of fuel getting in and out into the center of the city. So there's that. But in Miami and in actually all of Southeast Florida, where you have the same dynamic, right? Where you have a coastal ridge and sort of lowlands on both sides. There was a housing dynamic here where people of color, African Americans, Bahamians, were redlined, segregated onto only living on the coastal ridge, right? And they didn't even have access to the beach, right? A lot of the beaches were sundown towns, so segregated. You couldn't go to the beach as a Black person. It was the old South, right? And excuse me, that's led to a housing pattern where in neighborhoods like Sistrunk and Broward, in neighborhoods like Little Haiti in Miami, communities of color that had high ground properties lost those high ground properties in part to development pressure motivated by the changing climate. What is my proof of such a strange claim? There are developers here in town who literally tell you they're building a giant mega development in Little Haiti because it's climate safe, because it's not going to get flooded, right? And they're building luxury condos, and there's not a lot left there for the people who live in that neighborhood. So it's a skirmish for the high ground. And we have an idea where those people who are displaced go. They go to the lower ground. And that doesn't just make them vulnerable, it makes us vulnerable too. It makes everybody vulnerable. So we have to kind of figure out how to make our shared vulnerabilities hurt a little bit less, if that makes sense.
I think one thing we're seeing too is when we experience immigration from countries by people who worked in agriculture or farming in some countries now that are experiencing even more significant impacts than we are, perhaps, with extreme drought or extreme flooding, one extreme or the other. So we can probably expect that to increase in the future. Is that correct, do you think?
Yeah. Climate, I think if you go out to West Palm and you sit down with the Guatemalan Maya communities there that do a lot of the agricultural labor, and you ask them, hey, in Quechua, right? I don't speak Quechua, I speak Spanish, but if you ask them in Quechua, hey, why did you come to the United States, right? A large chunk of them will say, well, like, dude, it just stopped raining. And you'll be like, well, what do you mean it stopped raining? it stopped raining. It stopped raining as much. It stopped raining as often on what is called the Maya Highland of Guatemalan Plateau, right? This is Guatemala, Honduras, southeastern Yucatan of Mexico. Everybody there who used to farm maize, where are they going to go? They're here, a lot of them, right? And not only are they here, but they're also suffering more from heat stress. And there's a lot of good data on this. And from kidney failure and diseases because of just how much hotter it is generally, right? They're working to produce food for everybody here for substandard wages and substandard conditions. And they're also now suffering greater effects on their body because of a change in the temperature regime, which has also affected the planting season here and the growing seasons, et cetera, et cetera.
I know you've been monitoring some of the legislative activity in this past session. And do you have any bills that you want to talk about specifically? I do want to ask you to comment on the net metering bill because I know you wrote an article about it.
Yeah.
But, any others that you have in mind that you want to comment on?
Sure. So if you haven't read my reporting on the net metering bill, I suggest you go out. It's in the Herald, it's in the Guardian. It's a good old-fashioned watchdog story, right? And what it basically says is that FPL, Florida Power and Light, once again tried to do away with a net metering provision in that the Public Service Commission has enacted. The Public Service Commission, which ostensibly regulates the utility. What does that mean, right? It means that in Florida, the Sunshine State, if you put solar panels on your roof, are supposed to get the same amount of power or the same price for the power that you put into the grid as the people in the grid are paying for the power. Just kind of, parity there. FPL wanted that provision altered. And additionally, it wanted additional costs on solar owners to be levied, right? If you were solar, you had to pay a certain amount every month or something like that. Refer to the stories, please. And so what they did is they wrote the bill themselves. And then they submitted it to a legislator, Jennifer Bradley, if I remember correctly her name, District 2 or District 5, I do not remember. And they're like, hey, here's what we got. Do you want to submit it for us? No changes made. Bradley submitted it. I think 2 days after she submitted it, nice big donation of 10 grand to her political action committee, if I remember correctly. That bill sparked a lot of debate, a lot of back and forth. The solar industry obviously didn't like it. It was going to kill 40,000 jobs. The utility would argue that it has a legitimate concern because even a small amount of solar on rooftops represents a legitimate threat to their business model, right? If about 1% of Florida homes have solar panel, right? If that adoption rate increases to, I don't know, 9, 10, 12, 15, 25%, all of a sudden they're going to be making a lot less money from everybody, right? And you're going to be saving probably more money if you have a solar panel. And if you're an investor-owned utility, that's bad for you. So you use your constitutional right to try and pass a law. DeSantis killed the bill in a veto that I did not expect. I was very surprised to see. And his argument was that in an inflationary environment where energy prices are spiking, it doesn't make sense to pass a provision that increases overall energy prices. And that was the government's striking of FPL.
Do you think there will be payback for that?
Well, I can tell you that Florida Power and Light originally supported Adam Putnam in the 2016 Republican primary race. So did big agriculture, right? We can safely say most of the associated industries of Florida were a supporter of Adam Putnam. I think it's safe to say that, but we should check on Mosaic and HCA. And I don't know You know, I think one could argue that the current governor has a populist streak. I think also one could argue that if he killed the bill, he also gave them some blandishments, right? He's named some members of their board to and some members of their corporate hierarchy to very powerful positions within the state. You know, Eric Szilagyi, the CEO of FPL, is, if I remember correctly, on the board of governors for the University of Florida. I think Robo got appointed to something recently. So, you know, it's a give and take. It's politics. I couldn't speculate as to whether or not there'll be some sort of payback for Ron DeSantis.
I think too, you know, you talk about populist, but during this legislative session, it was an attempt to reduce the ability of citizens to get petition a ballot amendment on a proposed ballot amendment on the actual ballot for voting. And you talked about a case that you attended in the courtroom about a judge who dismissed a case, I think it was, or found that the language wasn't.
Yeah, so that was a very interesting ballot amendment. One, obviously, there's been a lot of moves by the state legislature to reduce the power of constitutional amendments and their likelihood, and also to reduce the power of local governments to legislate, right? If you're Palm Beach now, you can do a lot less than what you used to do before this last legislature because of, you know, this sort of Tallahassee takeover, as a friend of mine on the podcast is called. But when it comes to energy deregulation, right now in Florida, the people who can sell energy are the big electric monopoly utilities that are owned by investors, or you have municipal utilities, right, that are owned by your city. There isn't a free market for energy. We made a pact way back when, and about 100 years ago, and we said, hey, look, if you build out the grid for everybody and you connect everybody, we'll grant you a state regulated monopoly, right? Which is great, right? It's a guaranteed return on investment, right? This amendment would have deregulated the energy industry here in Florida in ways that are difficult to understand or predict, right? It would have made us look, if you know a little bit about the Texas energy system, it would have made us look a lot more like that. Now, there's a legitimate debate to be had between the relative merits of a system based on investor-owned utilities and a free market energy system, right? There are give and takes, right? Like Texas hasn't had the best of times with that. But this energy deregulation initiative was struck down by the court, in part because it was a little densely worded. But you know, you gotta question the court sometimes because they let that anti-solar bill or anti-solar amendment in 2016 go, and that one was actually going to do the opposite of what it was supposed to do. So,
You wrote your book nearly 3 years ago now.
correct.
Do you see any changes since that point?
Yeah, there are absolutely significant changes. I'm here to tell you that actually, and listen, I spend my day holding corporate America accountable for polluting the climate, and I spend my time doing watchdog reporting on corporations and their influence on government, right? But there has been a marked shift in how corporations are looking at the climate crisis, right? 5 years ago in Miami, we were talking about pumps, we were talking about infrastructure, we were talking about big engineering firms, right? That's who was coming to town at the City of Miami Beach Convention Center. There was like a ExCom, Deltares, you know, being like, oh, we'll help you with your flooding. They're still here. But now who's also coming to town, right? You have the CEOs of some of the largest corporations in the world coming here and announcing climate pledges, right? Now, are those climate pledges, are they going to follow through on that? That's what I'm here to report on. How honest are these climate pledges? I'm here to report on that too. But we have to acknowledge that the discourse is changing, right? The way that they're talking about this is changing. And it may not be changing fast enough to keep us from facing some very real climate consequences, but there are large portions of the financial world, there are large portions of the insurance world that are like, hey folks, this is actually really bad for investment. And people are listening and they're starting to change. So that is heartening, right? That's very, very, very heartening.
And I think that we're seeing that and paying a little more attention to it. And I know in the series, The Invading Seas, that is an initiative that number of major newspapers are participating in the state of Florida. One contributor writes a column on the business of climate change and how nationally the Chamber of Commerce is supporting businesses who want to, plan, produce, or market alternatives to plastic, single-use plastic, or home products that can save energy in the home, et cetera. But I wonder too, do you feel hopeful, Mario, or do you think we're just kind of a doomed area in Florida that eventually nothing will be able to save us? Do you really feel as though Miami can be saved?
It depends on the day. So when I talk to folks like you at the Sierra Club who are participating in local government, who are showing up to the meetings, who are exercising their democratic rights, right? Who are members of civil society, who are informed, I feel better about what's going on, right? If you're reading the newspaper and a subscriber to the newspaper, I feel better about what's going on and I have hope, right? Because I think that engaged citizens in a responsive democracy would be able to solve this crisis in a way that some semblance of Miami survives, right? Those are the good days, and today is a good day, right? So I'm very happy to be talking to y'all. So yeah.
Now, for people who have not yet read your book, which I hope many on the call will be inspired to read it, because it was just really a wonderful read that I can attest to. But what would be the 3 takeaways from your book? What points do you think are the most important, or 3 of the most important ones you made?
Yeah, so I would say 1, that climate change is real and it's going to affect you in ways that you hadn't imagined, right? 2, that you can intelligently prepare for it, and you can prepare your family and your loved ones for it, right? You can think smart about it, and you can understand a little bit more about how cities work through my own story, and start participating in the task of adapting your environment to what is coming, and to ideally stopping the worst of what is coming, because something is coming down the pipe regardless at this point. But also, I just hope you have a little bit of fun, and you laugh a little bit, because I did some crazy stuff in this book. Really, like I kayaked up the Miami River. It was wet.
Yeah, yes, the ending was, I'm not going to spoil the ending for anybody who will reread the book, but it is a surprise ending. And that's why I say it reads more like a novel than a scientific digest on the data involved with climate change. But okay, Mary Cassell, has been monitoring the chat for us. And I think right now we'll open it up for questions from the audience. And so Mary, do you have some questions lined up?
Well, from Kate Wesner, she asks, how honest is FPL's pledge?
Oh boy, okay. So I'm gonna have to be very delicate in how I discuss this, because I have not sat down and done the mathematics, and I have not read any authoritative reports about the relative efficacy of the pledge thus far. Here's what I understand of the pledge, right? FPL is making a giant bet on something called green hydrogen. Now, if I came up to y'all on the street and I asked you the difference between green, blue, and gray hydrogen, would anybody here be able to explain to me the difference?
No.
No, right, crickets, exactly. So why hydrogen? What is hydrogen? What does it matter, right? And why make a giant bet as an investor-owned utility company on hydrogen, right? It's kind of weird. So right now, Florida Power and Light, though they may dispute this characterization, is essentially a fossil fuel company. 70% of the energy in the state comes from burning methane, right? People like to call it natural gas. It's the same stuff in cow farts, folks. Now, that's a lot of infrastructure. It's a lot of plants, it's a lot of pipelines, it's a lot of money that they put into the system, and it's a lot of value that shareholders can still derive from bringing that out. So how do you transition to a no carbon version of that, right? How do you change that infrastructure to not emitting CO2 while still making money from it as an investor-owned utility with a regulated monopoly? That's a very hard circle to square. And you have to understand the plan that they've proposed as one that does that. And that's why green hydrogen matters, right? Hydrogen, obviously, kind of flammable. Everybody here remembers Hindenburg, right?
Mhm.
Went up in kind of a ball of flame. It was filled with hydrogen, not helium. However, there's 3 ways to get hydrogen, right? You can burn a fossil fuel to create energy to break water up. That's called gray hydrogen. There's blue hydrogen, which you can get from burning natural gases or from processing fossil fuels. And then there's green hydrogen. And green hydrogen comes from using green energy, right, to break up water into oxygen and hydrogen. And then you burn that water, or that hydrogen, not the water, right? I guess you could burn the oxygen, but I don't know if that works. So what FPL is basically betting is that between now and 2045, they can bring online enough megawatts of solar a year. And we're talking about like 3 megawatts of solar a year. Like, this is a lot of solar, that they can begin to produce enough green energy to break enough water molecules apart to power power plants, right, that are going to be burning this hydrogen. The problem with renewable energy, right, with wind or with solar, is that it doesn't always work, right? The wind doesn't blow whenever you want it to blow. The sun doesn't always shine. So there are variabilities within the system, especially in the evenings when we're all, if this were Britain, turning on our tea kettles or whatnot. It's not a particularly sunny time. So you need some way to store this energy. And FPL is betting that they're going to use a molecule, hydrogen, to do it. That's the plan, okay? That's the basic plan. I haven't done the numbers. I haven't looked at the math. I've been busy on another story. I'm very excited to dig into it. I think scrutiny of the plan is worthwhile, right? I think honest debate about the plan is necessary. And I think we really should be making sure that we can double check their math. And I also think that, as people who want this to happen, who have an interest in a case in making sure that this happens, we should be watching it very closely.
I think there was a recent article that just was published about a week or so ago with regard to these storage buildings that are being built out in from California, or feeding off of energy from,
right.
Yeah, and that is showing great promise. But again, it's steps. Although, realistically, Florida Power and Light gets its money from us. So whatever they decide to build, we're funding it. So
Yep, you're paying for it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're paying for it.
And I find it a little disingenuous during the time of inflation and after the pandemic that gas companies are making more profits than ever before. They're reducing production and keeping us in this constant loop of less supply and higher prices, while complaining about that we're not deregulating quickly to allow them to produce more. Very.
Yeah, it looks like we should be investing it on these utilities, that's the most we could do right now.
Right.
It's a very good place to invest your money. So water and
I
any electric
think-
utilities.
Yeah.
Okay, Gary has a question. Can you talk about how the increased water will affect our reservoir and drinking water?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're drinking water and I apologize for not understanding the hydrology of Palm Beach as well as I do Broward and Miami-Dade, right? In Broward and Miami-Dade and in parts of Palm, especially Southern Palm like Boca, your water definitely comes from the Biscayne aquifer, right? And it gets pumped out of that aquifer, and your main danger to your water supply is that aquifer going salty, saltwater intrusion. Now, the clerk of courts of Miami-Dade, a guy named Harvey Rubin, who's also a really good rapper, he's got a rap about climate change from 2005. This guy saw it coming way before anybody else did. Harvey moved the wellheads in Miami-Dade, Harvey and others, but Harvey was on the plan. I guess the rap helped. West, way west, to a part where the ocean couldn't get at them, right? And so Miami-Dade has a more secure water supply. Broward did not have a far-sighted rapping public servant. And they didn't move a lot of their wellheads. And so some of the wellheads have gone salty, and certain cities have scrambled to figure out their water. I encourage you to figure out what the infrastructure in your area looks like, where your water comes from, where your waste goes, where your electricity comes from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And start thinking, okay, 2 more feet of water, what does that do, right? And if it doesn't do any good.
Yeah, okay.
A scary thought. It's really a scary thought. Do we have any other questions?
Let's see, from Linda. I'm trying to, she's making a comment about something, but there's really not a question.
Oh, she has a question. What kind of numbers are we talking now as an estimate for 2030?
30. 5 inches or 8 inches by 2040 or 5 inches by 2030. What are the numbers?
Yeah,
Incrementally,
sure.
decades.
So sorry,
Decades.
that rattling, that's my cat's automatic feeder. It's the only way I get to sleep in the mornings. He's lovely, but wow. Okay, so the honest answer to how much you're supposed to expect in the near term is it depends on who you listen to. The best people to listen to is the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact, in my opinion, right? They are the ones that are setting the curves to what infrastructure planners here are expecting. And you can reasonably expect by 2030, 4 to 8 inches. I know there's like 4 inches in there. I can't tell you, depending, right? But you can reasonably expect there to be 4 to 8 inches more. Maybe it ends up being 4, maybe it ends up being 8 on average, okay? Once again, I encourage you to think through what that is going to do to your home, that is going to do to your commute, what that is going to do to all of the systems that make your life possible, right? Because that's really what I want to encourage you to do as part of my project with this book, is to take personal account for like, okay, 6 inches of sea level rise. Wait a second, that's a foot since 93. Okay, folks, what does that do? You know, and I think with Google and with some basic mathematics, you can get pretty far in understanding what is going to happen.
And you talk about something in your book that I was unfamiliar with, and those are called feedback loops. So any kind of prediction is really just a prediction and is quite subject to being enhanced or increased or pronounced in real time.
Yeah.
Is that
So
correct?
there's a lot of understanding that we don't have about the climate system. Everything that we know about the climate system points to the lights blinking red, right? But we can't tell how deep or ochre the color of the hue of the red is. We don't really know a lot about the worst things that could go wrong. There's a very good book by David Wallace Wells called The Ends of the Earth. it's like the worst case scenarios, right? I don't dwell on the worst case scenarios, but I want to caution people to understand that politicians, activists, technocrats, anybody really who sits there and tells you, yeah, this thing can be controlled. Yeah, we can adapt in a way that we understand. And oh, don't worry, we've got a really nice shiny pump. You gotta take those claims with a grain of salt and evaluate them, because the climate system is really complex. There's a point at which wildlands, forests stop sequestering carbon and start emitting carbon, right? And what happens when that flip gets switched? Or what happens when the peat and all the permafrost starts melting, right? There are carbon bombs out there that are pretty scary to talk about. So yeah, that's all there.
And it is melting. The permafrost is melting. So
yeah, it is.
And releasing
methane,
prehistoric microbes
right.
which is
that are not your
wonderful,
friends.
yeah.
Do not
Where
talk to
can we
strange
follow
prehistoric
your
microbes.
investigative work from one of the people in this chat? They're asking.
Great
where
question.
Follow.
So I work at a nonprofit called Floodlight. We are relatively new. We are always looking for supporters. We are a nonprofit investigative news outlet. That's Flood, F-L-O-O-D, Light. And it's floodlightnews.org is the website. We actually have an article dropping tomorrow morning. I can't say what it's about, but I can tell you that it's really interesting.
Floodlight News, 3 words.
Floodlight News. We don't have an outlet, right? So we do journalistic collaborations. We don't have our own newspaper. We co-publish. So for this investigation, we actually put a coalition of newspapers together. We partnered with the Florida Times Union in Jacksonville, the Orlando Sentinel in Orlando, and the Guardian in Manchester, but they have a national coverage in the United States, to get this investigation out. And it's been a doozy, but it drops at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. So.
Tomorrow, wonderful, great. We'll check it out.
Yeah. There's another question from Linda here. What is the lowest elevation of I-95 where the Publix trucks will have to wait for low tide to proceed?
Oh, that's great. That's a great question. Okay. I actually investigated this. I have a whole article about, and we co-published this with the Miami Herald back when I was at the Sun Sentinel's investigative room, about how Florida is preparing its transportation network for sea level rise. The good news is that the majority of the critical transportation network in the state of Florida is immune to about 1 foot of sea level rise, right? Now, the critical transportation network is only like 20 to 30% of roads. They're like the high traffic, the arteries, right? Like sea level rise is not going to give the Florida road network a coronary that's going to kill it. However, the limbs are going to start to get tingly and not get as much blood, is the best way that I can describe it. There's a lot of roads. I forget the exact amount. You'd have to search the article. It was over a year ago now. But we actually calculated it for FDOT. FDOT didn't know how much of its roads were gonna flood at 1 foot of sea level rise, and we sat down and we did the math. Alex Harris from the Herald and I, and we gave them the number, and they're like, "Oh, thanks." So that was a really fun investigation. Check it out. I think it's possible to kind of figure out whether or not your road is going to be floody from that.
Well, I'll tell you, when we went to that compact workshop in the Keys down in Key West in December of 2019, when I was driving there, it was scary because it was December, first week in December, and they were still experiencing king tide flooding, which typically happens in October, early November, and it was still hanging around. And now nothing is quite as scary as driving on a 2-lane highway with water lapping less than 10 or 15 feet on either side of you. One side the Atlantic Ocean and one side the Gulf. So, I mean, you feel like you're just going to get swept away in the ocean. It was scary, I will tell you. Very scary. So anyway, we have any more questions? We'll try to wrap it up now. Mario, thank you ever so
Thank
much.
you.
Again, folks, I hope you'll take a look and read a couple pages of Mario's because I think if you do, you're going to end up buying it. I am happy to provide a copy of Mario's book to the winner of our mystery chat or mystery question. And that question is, Mario identified 3 takeaways that he would like for us to process from his book. The first person who provides one of those takeaways in the chat will win a copy of Mario's book. Go for it. Kate.
Oh, we've got someone here already.
Kate is the winner. Kate Weisner. Weisner. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Okay, you win. Kate, just tell, after the meeting tonight, just send me your address and we'll have that book mailed to you. My name is my email address. It's marymertz@me.com. So just send me your address and we'll get it mailed out to you post haste. Thanks, Kate. You were listening. And Mario, I hope we're all going to be tuned in to see your article tomorrow morning. And I know I can speak for all of us wishing you well and more investigative stories as you go along, especially publish them now before the election so we can really get necessary insight into some of the activities of our elected officials so we can vote accordingly.
Absolutely.
Keep up the good work, Mario. Really
Yeah.
good.
Please
And
keep supporting
Linda,
good journalism.
I filled in for Linda today. I hope I didn't embarrass her too much. Linda, would you like to say a few closing remarks here?
No, I think you did an excellent job. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Mary. And thank you, everyone that attended. Yes, go out and buy the book, put it on your iPad. And we definitely look forward to seeing you in July for the slime crimes. So everyone have a great summer and try to stay cool. Ha, ha, ha.
And I forgot to ask if anybody had anything they'd like to share.
Yep, you might want to turn off the mic if we're gonna just let it rip.
Okay.
Or the recording. I'm sorry, turn off the recording